So for today, we're going to do a quick talk about probiotics, foods that feed your healthy gut bacteria. So we're going to go over a little bit of this today. I'm not going to cover supplements so much. That I could talk all day about in terms of probiotics. So for today, we're going to talk more about a food first approach. So if you aren't familiar with me, my name's Anna. I'm the registered dietitian over at Specialty Health Wellness in Reno, Nevada. I work mostly with first responders. I have been at Specialty Health for almost 2 years now. I am a baby dietitian, as they call it in my profession. I've spent my whole first 2 years at Specialty Health Wellness. My favorite topic in terms of sports nutrition is sports nutrition. I love talking about supplements, so that's kind of where I nerd out. Those are my favorite interesting topics to look at. My favorite hobbies are weightlifting. I'm currently participating in December, so that's super fun. It's been a little taxing on the body and the mind, but it's been really enjoyable. My husband is a football coach, so I do love watching football. I love baking, which I know seems quite ironic that I'm a dietitian, but I do love baking and DIY projects. My house is currently under renovation, so that's keeping me quite busy. And my favorite holiday food this year is rum. Well, not every year, not this year, every year I should say. Correct myself, is my grandmother's rum cake. It's the most amazing thing in the world. And let's get going. All right, so key points for today. We're going to go over what are probiotics exactly, what are gut bacteria, and then I love to talk about there's a distinction between probiotics and prebiotics, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit today. Probiotic foods, examples, and kind of the details as to how to try those out. And are probiotics necessary? Then I'll just open it up for some quick questions and discussion. So what are probiotics? Probiotics are live microorganisms that are intended to have health benefits when consumed or applied to the body. So basically, they're microscopic living little things that have a symbiotic relationship with our colon and our gut. So they help us out and we help them out. So it's a nice little relationship we have going. And the reason this has come about is there's a lot of different functions that probiotics have within the body. I'll cover those here in a second. But most common ways you'd probably think of probiotics. Recently, kombucha is really popular, or even pickles, sauerkraut. There's a lot of different foods that have these little microorganisms present in them, just from whether they're added during the process of production or they're just present and kind of find their way into those foods. So gut bacteria, we have billions and trillions of tiny little microorganisms that reside in our large intestine, which is our colon, which is the last section of our intestines. So our intestines, the first two sections of it, or the first three, are our small intestine. Those are not necessarily meant to have bacteria in them. It's a little more detrimental. That those portions of the intestine are definitely more for our purposes of absorption and us getting our nutrients. The colon is where it's really interesting, because the colon's where, obviously, that's where all of our waste is produced, but these little good bacteria like to feed off of those remnants and help protect our intestinal lining, which is very interesting. They also kind of are the gatekeepers for whether we have good or bad things be let back into our body through that those tiny little microscopic holes that are in our large intestine that allow things to pass through, like water and electrolytes and minerals. So we definitely have a very interdependent relationship with these little guys. So some good bacteria that are present in our gut are going to be Lactococcus, Lactobacillus, and Lactobacillus bifidus. There's hundreds upon hundreds of different bacteria that we have found that we have a beneficial relationship with. Those are just a few common ones that you might be familiar with. Another really common one is Bifidobacterium. I do always try and look for certain probiotics when I'm looking for supplements, but that is a different discussion for a different day. There are so many different ones that really can be helpful. And there's a lot of different ones present in foods that we're going to talk about. Some of the bad bacteria that we don't necessarily want to be present, but sometimes can find their way in, are Clostridium perfringens. So that is a common, it's known as the cafeteria bug. So that can be if food has been mishandled and can be contaminated by fecal matter or other things, or it's just sat out too long, and this bacteria can sometimes make its way into foods. Staphylococcus, that is definitely not one we want in our gut. And E. coli is also a common one that we don't want in our gut as well. That one you're probably familiar with for undercooked beef, or it's a pathogen that can be caused by improper food handling again. So there's quite a few bad guys out there too, but if we keep enough of the good bacteria in there, we should be okay. So a lot of the different functions, there's so many. We're still finding out a lot of different functions and relationships that probiotics have with the human body. There are many that they're still working to find out exactly how and why, but ones that have been proven and we like to talk about are that they help protect our intestinal lining. So our intestines are quite hardy but delicate at the same time. So we want to try and protect them and prolong their health and longevity as long as we can, because it is our main tool for absorption, and also it helps with our immune system as well. We don't want our intestines to be too permeable or allow foreign bodies into the bloodstream, because that can cause a lot of issues. It can cause a lot of immune responses. So it's really important that we keep our intestines healthy, and these good bacteria help us do it. They help us break down food and the remnants of what food is produced that we digest and produce waste with. Also, it helps us break down medications. They help us also produce vitamins. I think this is the coolest function that I really like to think of when I think of probiotics and good bacteria, is that they help us produce vitamins. So B6 and B12 are really common ones that the good bacteria actually help produce, and then our bodies reabsorb it. So it's really kind of cool. They also can produce amino acids as well. And they're really sensitive to helping us maintain bone density. So they're very sensitive to what our body's needs are. So it's kind of a cool little relationship. So probiotics versus prebiotics is a really important distinction, because probiotics are living. They are part of our body's way of communicating with its environment, in the sense that those little gut bacteria that live in our colon actually have a connection to our brain as well. They're highly sensitive to hormone signals that our brain sends out. So they're really sensitive to what's basically going on in your body and kind of what you have around you. So they're really receptive to their environment. So they're very receptive to what we eat and what we put in our bodies, because that in turn becomes their food eventually. So they're quite alert to what's going on around them. They are a synergistic organism in that they work with the human body, and they couldn't live without the human body, because that's their home. It's what protects them from the outside world. So we have definitely a synergistic relationship with probiotics, and they help us produce vitamins. So as I mentioned, that's a really cool little fact. Prebiotics are what feed probiotics. So I like this little image at the bottom of the screen. It says this is your gut or your intestines, and the probiotics are the little Pac-Man looking cartoons, and the prebiotics are what feed them. So it's a really great way to think of it, because prebiotics are so before. So those are foods that we eat that have a lot of fiber or different nutrients that the probiotics like to eat. So fiber is a really good one, because the human body and our stomach doesn't really break it down. It still is in its cellulose form, and there's still a lot of structure to it. and those bacteria that live in our colon a lot of times like to feed off of that. So it's great food for them, not only for us, but for the bacteria. Also, these prebiotics can help keep up the populations of the good bacteria. So they're foods that foster the growth of bacteria that we want, which helps keep down the numbers of the bacteria that we don't want, the bad bacteria. So it's definitely a contest for who can have what real estate in your gut. So it's definitely a population contest of we want to keep those good bacteria alive and have a bunch of them so that they populate your colon and help keep out the bad bacteria. So what are probiotic foods? Probiotic foods, there's a bunch of different ones. I have listed some here on the right hand side of the screen, but over on the left hand top corner I wrote think germs. So there's a lot of different ways that probiotics have made their way into our foods. So these little bacteria either come from a process of fermentation. So a really easy example is beer. Beer uses yeast to ferment hops and wheat and sugars, and it creates alcohol. So fermentation is a process that uses different bacteria to create flavor and create alcoholic beverages. Also culturing. Culturing is where we add additional bacteria sources into a food. So think of like cheese or yogurt or sour cream. We are adding some additional bacteria to foods like milk, and it creates a different food. So sour cream or Greek yogurt. Pickling actually also can have bacteria present as well. Pickling is usually using salt and sugars and spices to pull moisture and preserve a food for a long period of time, but actually it also can have some really beneficial bacteria present. A really great example of this is green olives. Green olives that are cured and preserved in a really salty brine have some really great bacteria present that our gut loves. So I kind of spoiled the last one, but brining. So brining is using salt to pull moisture out of a food. And actually when you cook a food, then it helps retain the moisture that's present. So it's kind of a cool preservation method and also used for probiotics as well. So some examples of foods are going to be Greek yogurt. Regular yogurt is as well, but it's not really as cultured. It's got a different texture. Usually regular yogurts have more sugar in them and they have more lactose sugars. So the reason that I say Greek yogurt is I think of that having more of those beneficial probiotic bacteria, because when you let the yogurt continue to culture, those little bacteria eat up all of those lactose sugars, and the yogurt's got a really interesting taste. It's kind of got that funky taste because there's not a ton of lactose sugar left. So it's really a different type of food. Sour cream is a common one. It's literally curdled cream using different bacteria to give it its sour taste. Kombucha. This is a really popular one in the health food world right now. Kombucha is great in terms of it's not necessarily a super sweet drink unless they add additional sugars to it, but it's got a ton of really beneficial bacteria from what they call the mother or the SCOBY, which grows all of these. It's like almost like if you've seen, oh gosh, what's it, the movie with the giant green jello man and he absorbs all of the different like objects. I think it's from Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, if I remember correctly. But anyways, I digress. Kombucha is full of probiotics, and it's a really great drink because it's usually pretty easy on the stomach, and it's a really easy way to get some probiotics into the diet with very little effort and very little calories. So it's a great way to incorporate it. Kefir's not so popular these days. It's got a little bit more dairy in it. It is a cultured milk beverage, so I think of the texture of these like a Danimals yogurt, like the little kids mini yogurt drinks. It's kind of that type of texture. And they're usually sweetened as well. Sauerkraut is an excellent option if you're thinking of going towards something that's more pickled. It's really great to add to different foods. It gives it a savory and salty flavor. So definitely try it out if you haven't. Miso paste is a really great cooking option. Miso provides a really savory and salty aspect to foods. If you've never tried cooking with it, I would highly recommend it. It's an excellent way to incorporate some probiotics into everyday foods or that you're going to cook. Pickles. I mentioned olives a little bit earlier, but pickles are also a really great option too. They are they're preserved with salt and sugar, and so those are just a really common one that we normally don't think of. Kimchi. Kimchi is probably one of the more thought of probiotic foods. It is on the spicier side, so if you're sensitive to spicy foods, this is not one that I would recommend. Aged cheeses. So cheeses are so many different kinds, but the general rule of thumb, so if you're thinking of cheeses that are going to have more cultures present, I would think of Parmesan and Parmigiano Reggiano, Romano, Pecorino, drier, really stiff cheeses that are really cultured. So they have a lot of the moisture pulled out. They're very dry. They almost, you can see they'll have like little crusty, crunchy pieces in them almost. Those cheeses are definitely more aged, and they have a lot more bacteria present in them because they've had the time to grow in the cheeses. Natto is a very interesting food if you've never looked it up or tried it. It's very similar in texture to okra, so if you're not a fan of slimy, I wouldn't recommend it. But all of this to say that probiotics are really individualized in what works for your digestive system. Everyone is so unique. We all have a completely unique and our own personalized flora and zoo going on in our guts. So they all are competing for space, and they all are competing for food. So it really depends on the type of foods that you eat, where you live, what time of year it is. They're really highly sensitive to what is kind of going on in our bodies at the time. So hormones and stress also play a huge role. We want to try and mitigate stress because the good bacteria can sometimes be sensitive to higher levels of stress as well. So just something to think about for that as well. But definitely the foods that you eat do affect your populations of good and bad bacteria in your gut. So it does matter what we eat, and eventually down the line, it matters to your probiotics in your colon. So that's kind of how those work. But are they necessary? So in terms of supplements aren't always necessary. I would say try and incorporate foods that make you feel good, and try and incorporate some probiotic foods if you're sick or using antibiotics. Antibiotics, some particular prescriptions or types of antibiotics can cause diarrhea or constipation, and that's because the antibiotics, the really hefty ones, sometimes can actually wipe out our gut bacteria, and so your body's kind of having to start from scratch. And so to give yourself a leg up and kind of get things going again in the right direction, it can be useful to incorporate some probiotic foods like Greek yogurt and all of the options that we talked about in the previous slide, but it really can help. And if you're stressed or you're going through a difficult time in your life, or you have a lot going on, incorporating some probiotic foods and kind of creating it as a focus might be a great option as well. Or if you're experiencing GI issues, so if you're having any sort of diarrhea or constipation, or any just like gastrointestinal discomfort, probiotics can help sometimes. So, but it's all really individualized. So I would encourage you, if you are thinking about it, just to do your research, ask your doctor, and ask questions, and make sure that you're making the right choices for yourself, and try them out. If they don't work, they don't work, but finding one that's right for your particular unique gut and what you have going on is sometimes a bit of trial and error, but it can be worth it. So some resources that I have posted here. My favorite is the top one. It's from the National Institute of Health, NIH. It's just their page on probiotics, so it's meant for public viewing. It's a great explanation and in-depth look at current research that's going on and what some popular supplements may be containing and all of the nuts and bolts to probiotics. So if you have any additional questions after today and you just want to read up on it, that's a great link to look at. So you can, this is the website I was talking about. It's the National Institute for Health, and this is their page for complementary and integrative health. They're all about what studies are being done and what current really well-vetted research is going on. So there's a lot of different ways to research this topic, but if you have any questions, you are welcome to ask me. Oh, and it started me, oh, there it goes. So with that being said, I'll just finish up my key points here for today. So when you're looking at probiotics and foods, assess kind of what you've got going on personally. If you're interested in incorporating either a supplement or some additional foods, pay attention to what's going on for you, if it helps your symptoms or not. And food first is always a great option. It's definitely cheaper. It's an easier way to incorporate things and just try things out without feeling so bad if you buy a whole bottle of $50 probiotics and then they don't work for you. It's like a fruitcake and you want to try and give them away because they don't work for you. So I would definitely say try some yogurt or something that's a little more inexpensive, and it might actually work better. Food first is always a great option. And definitely check with your healthcare provider if you're considering a supplement for sure. Let them know. A lot of times they can have additional ingredients and they might not work for you. So just something to think about. Definitely check with your doctor before you start something new. But that's my 2 cents for that one. And find what works for you. So it's a trial and error process, definitely. They have not figured out all of the nuts and bolts of probiotics. That is still research in progress at the moment. So that's why it's such an interesting topic